June 4, 1942. The Battle of Midway. Captain Philip White watched in disbelief as Japanese Zeros tore through his formation like wolves through sheep. His squadron had launched with 21 fighters. Within 7 minutes, 13 were burning wrecks falling toward the Pacific. This wasn't supposed to happen. The aircraft they were flying, the Brewster F2A Buffalo, had been hailed as America's salvation. The Navy's first monoplane fighter, faster than anything Japan could field. Or so the reports claimed. But as White fought desperately to keep his crippled Buffalo airborne, watching his wingmen die around him, the terrible truth became undeniable. The Buffalo wasn't just outmatched. It was a death trap. This is the story of an aircraft that looked invincible in the factory, dominated in sales brochures, and impressed on test ranges. But when it finally faced combat, it failed so catastrophically that pilots called it the flying coffin. What you're about to hear is how America's most promising fighter became one of World War II's most deadly mistakes. Rewind to 1936. The U.S. Navy faced a problem. Their carrier fighters were biplanes, fabric-covered relics that could barely top 250 miles per hour. Meanwhile, intelligence suggested Japan was developing modern monoplane fighters. America needed to leapfrog the competition. Fast. The Navy issued a specification: a carrier-based fighter capable of 300 miles per hour, armed with 4 machine guns and able to operate from the cramped decks of aircraft carriers. Brewster Aeronautical Corporation, a small company in Queens, New York, won the contract. Their XFTA-1 prototype promised everything the Navy wanted, and on paper it delivered. The Brewster F2A Buffalo looked like the future. Mid-wing monoplane design, retractable landing gear, all-metal construction, enclosed cockpit. The specifications read like a wish list brought to life. Maximum speed, 321 miles per hour. That made it faster than anything currently flying in the Pacific. Range, 965 miles, enough to escort bombers and defend carrier groups. Service ceiling, 33,200 feet. Armament, 450 caliber machine guns with 1,600 rounds total. But the real innovation was the Wright R-1820 Cyclone engine. 9 cylinders producing 1,200 horsepower. Engineers promised reliability, power, and fuel efficiency. The Buffalo also featured hydraulic controls for the landing gear and flaps, cutting-edge technology in 1938. The bubble canopy gave pilots panoramic visibility. Weight-saving measures throughout the airframe promised nimble handling. Test flights seemed to confirm everything. The prototype performed beautifully in controlled conditions. Navy test pilots praised its stability and ease of handling. By 1939, the Buffalo wasn't just America's hope, it was an export sensation. Finland bought them. Britain ordered them. Belgium placed contracts. Even the Netherlands' East Indies wanted Buffaloes for their Pacific territories. Aviation magazines featured glowing profiles. America's aerial fist, one headline proclaimed. Military journals published technical breakdowns, marveling at the modern design. The Navy ordered 108 aircraft. Marine Corps squadrons lined up for allocation. Pilots considered assignment to a Buffalo squadron prestigious. Foreign test pilots added to the hype. Finnish Air Force evaluators called it superior in every way to their existing fighters. British pilots in training exercises reported excellent performance. Newsreels showed Buffaloes rolling off production lines. Politicians cited them as proof of American industrial superiority. The aircraft appeared in recruiting posters. Even Japanese intelligence took notice. Intercepted communications suggested concern about this new American fighter. Everything pointed to success. The faith in the Buffalo wasn't blind optimism. There were real reasons to believe. Brewster's chief designer, Dayton Brown, had credentials. He'd worked on successful racing aircraft. His team included engineers from established firms. The Navy's Bureau of Aeronautics had conducted extensive evaluations. Their reports endorsed the design. Career officers staked their reputations on the Buffalo program. More importantly, the competition wasn't impressive. The Grumman F4F Wildcat, the Buffalo's rival, was considered adequate but unexceptional. The Buffalo had beaten it in initial trials. Early adopters reported satisfaction. Finnish pilots flew Buffaloes successfully against Soviet aircraft in the Winter War, claiming dozens of kills. Those reports reinforced confidence. Production was already ramping up. Contracts were signed. Training programs established. Maintenance crews certified. The entire supply chain was committed. By late 1941, as tensions with Japan reached breaking point, American military planners counted the Buffalo among their strongest assets in the Pacific. Marine Fighter Squadron 221, stationed at Midway Atoll, received their Buffaloes with confidence and pride. They had no idea what was coming. June 4, 1942, 6:16 a.m. Radar operators at Midway detected the incoming Japanese strike force, 108 aircraft heading straight for the island. Every available fighter scrambled to intercept. Marine Fighter Squadron 221 launched 25 fighters, 21 Buffaloes, and 4 Wildcats. Major Floyd Parks led the formation. Most of his pilots had less than 10 hours in the Buffalo. Some had never fired the guns in combat conditions. They climbed to 14,000 feet, positioning between Midway and the incoming Japanese bombers. Pilots reported confidence over the radio. This was what they'd trained for. At 6:20 a.m., they spotted the enemy, 30 Mitsubishi bombers escorted by 36 Zero fighters. Major Parks gave the order, attack the bombers. The Buffaloes dove into combat. Within 30 seconds, everything went wrong. The Japanese Zeros reacted instantly, breaking formation and climbing to engage. What happened next shocked the American pilots. The Zeros were faster. Not slightly faster, dramatically faster. Buffaloes that should have topped 320 miles per hour struggled to reach 280. Heavily loaded with fuel and ammunition, they flew like cargo planes. The Zeros climbed past them effortlessly. Within 2 minutes, Japanese fighters had altitude advantage, a death sentence in aerial combat. Then the Buffaloes tried to maneuver. Lieutenant Charles Kuntz pulled into a hard turn, trying to track a Zero crossing his nose. His control stick went mushy. The Buffalo's wings, designed with weight-saving measures, flexed dangerously under G-forces. The aircraft wallowed through the turn like a bomber, not a fighter. The Zero he'd been chasing reversed direction in half the space, sliding onto Kuntz's tail. Cannon shells ripped through his fuselage within seconds. This scenario repeated across the sky. Every Buffalo pilot discovered the same terrifying truth. Their fighter couldn't turn with the enemy. The problem was fundamental. To save weight, Brewster had reduced structural reinforcement in the wings. In gentle test flights, this was fine. In combat maneuvering under stress and full fuel load, the wings twisted and flexed. Pilots reported aileron controls becoming sloppy in hard turns. Some thought they'd been hit before they even saw enemy tracers. 3 Buffaloes suffered catastrophic structural failures, wings folding upward under G-stress. Pilots had no time to bail out, but the structural problems were just the beginning. Captain William Humbird pushed his throttle to maximum, trying to climb away from 2 Zeros on his tail. His engine responded with a violent shudder, black smoke pouring from the cowling. Oil pressure dropped. Cylinder head temperature spiked into the red zone. The engine began losing power. Humbird's radio call was desperate. "My engine's quitting. I'm hit." "No, wait, I don't think I'm hit. The engine just quit." He wasn't hit. His engine had failed under combat stress. The Wright R-1820 Cyclone engine, so reliable in testing, had a critical flaw. The cooling system was marginal, under sustained high-power operation, exactly what combat demanded. Cylinder heads overheated. Add in the Buffalo's weight problem. By the time it reached operational squadrons, modifications and equipment had added 600 pounds beyond the original design weight. The engine, already working at limits, was now severely overloaded. 5 Buffaloes that day lost engines to overheating. Not one was hit by enemy fire. They simply couldn't sustain combat power. Pilots who reduced throttle to save engines became easy targets. Pilots who maintained power risked mechanical failure. It was a death sentence either way. The Buffalo had another secret weakness: its fuel tanks. Unlike later fighters with self-sealing tanks, early Buffaloes had unprotected fuel cells. A single bullet could rupture them. In test conditions, this seemed an acceptable risk. In combat, it was catastrophic. Zero pilots quickly learned: aim for the Buffalo's fuselage center. That's where the main tank sat, unarmored and exposed. Lieutenant Armistead Smith felt the impact before he saw the tracer. A single 7.7 round punched through his fuselage. Within seconds, gasoline sprayed throughout the cockpit. One spark would turn the aircraft into a fireball. Smith dove for the ocean, desperate to get down before fire erupted. He made it, barely. As he inflated his life raft, he watched his Buffalo sink, fuel streaming from multiple punctures. He was one of the lucky ones. Captain Marion Carl watched his wingman's Buffalo explode midair from a single burst. The Japanese pilot hadn't aimed for the engine or wings, just stitched rounds through the fuselage center. The fuel tank ignited like a bomb. 13 Buffaloes went down that day. 7 exploded in flight from fuel fires. For the pilots who survived the first minutes, another nightmare awaited. Their guns didn't work. Lieutenant Clayton Canfield finally got a zero in his sights. He pressed the trigger. 2 of his 4 guns fired. The other 2 remained silent, their charging mechanisms jammed. His brief burst missed. Before he could clear the jam, the zero was gone, and another was on his tail. The Buffalo's armament system was plagued with problems. The 50 caliber machine guns were mounted in the wings, requiring long ammunition feeds. These feeds, routed through the wing structure, were sensitive to the wing flexing under G-loads. When pilots maneuvered hard, which they did constantly in combat, ammunition belts kinked. Guns jammed. Of the 21 Buffaloes engaged, only 6 pilots reported all 4 guns functioning properly. 9 reported partial jams. 3 said none of their guns worked at all. The gun charging system also froze at altitude. The hydraulic fluid Brewster specified worked fine in temperate conditions. At 14,000 feet, in the cold air above the Pacific, it thickened. Several pilots couldn't even charge their guns before combat started. They flew into battle unarmed. Captain Philip White felt impacts hammering his Buffalo. 0 cannon shells, 20 mm explosive rounds, hit like sledgehammers. His seat armor, a thin plate supposedly proof against rifle-caliber rounds, shattered. Fragments sprayed his shoulders. A shell fragment lodged in his parachute pack, inches from his spine. The Buffalo's armor protection was, like everything else, inadequate. Early models had no armor at all. Later versions received a thin steel plate behind the pilot's head, protection against 30 caliber rounds. 0 cannon shells went through it like paper. The canopy structure offered no ballistic protection. Several pilots took head wounds from rounds passing through the plexiglass. Worse, the Buffalo lacked adequate fire suppression systems. When fuel fires started, there was no automatic extinguisher, no CO2 system. Pilots could only pray the flames didn't reach them before they bilayed out. The radio chatter that morning told the story of utter disaster. "I can't shake him. The damn plane won't turn. My guns are jammed, all 4 guns jammed. Engines overheating, I'm losing power. Fire in the cockpit, I'm getting out. They're everywhere, we can't compete with them." Captain Marion Carl, one of the few survivors, reported, "The Buffalo could not climb, could not turn, could not run. We were simply target practice." Lieutenant Charles Hughes wrote in his after-action report, "The F2A-3 is not a combat aircraft. It is a death trap. Any commander who sends men into combat in this aircraft is committing murder." Major Floyd Parks, the squadron commander, was shot down and killed. His last radio transmission, "There's too many of them, we can't." The engagement lasted 15 minutes. When the surviving Buffaloes limped back to Midway, pilots climbed out trembling. Some broke down. One pilot sat on the wing of his bullet-riddled Buffalo and wept openly. Captain Philip White, his aircraft shot to pieces, his squadron decimated, made a report that became infamous. The Brewster F2A Buffalo is not a fighter aircraft. It is a coffin with wings. I will not order my men to fly it again. Court-martial me if you must, but I will not send them to die in these machines. The numbers from Midway told a story no official report could hide. Marine Fighter Squadron 221 launched 25 fighters that morning. 13 were shot down. 2 more crashed attempting emergency landings, their pilots dead or dying. 15 aircraft lost. 14 pilots killed, all in 15 minutes. But here's the revealing detail. Of those 15 losses, 13 were Buffaloes. Only 2 were Wildcats. The loss rate for Buffaloes that day, 62%. Compare this to the F4F Wildcat fighting in the same battle, facing the same enemy. Wildcat loss rate, 15%. The Buffalo didn't just underperform. It was 4 times more likely to be destroyed in combat. Across the Pacific Theater, Buffalo combat statistics painted an identical picture. In the Philippines, Dutch pilots flying Buffaloes achieved a kill-to-loss ratio of 1:5. For every Japanese aircraft they shot down, they lost 5 Buffaloes. British pilots in Burma flying Buffaloes against Japanese fighters called them flying targets. Their combat reports mentioned the aircraft's inadequacies more than enemy tactics. Even in Finland, where early successes had built the Buffalo's reputation, pilots stopped requesting them. They preferred captured Soviet fighters. The total production run: 509 Buffaloes delivered to U.S. forces. Combat losses: 321 aircraft destroyed, 63%. But here's the damning statistic: only 112 of those were lost to enemy fire. The rest: accidents, mechanical failures, and operational losses. The Buffalo was more dangerous to its own pilots than the enemy was. After Midway, pilot resistance turned into outright rebellion. At Marine Air Group 22 in Hawaii, pilots scheduled to receive Buffaloes submitted a formal letter. "We refuse to fly this aircraft in combat." 23 pilots signed it. The Navy faced an unprecedented crisis. Court-martial war heroes for refusing to fly unsafe aircraft. Impossible. Ignore their concerns. Equally impossible after the Midway disaster. Wing commanders found themselves trapped between orders and reality. Captain John Carey wrote to the Bureau of Aeronautics, "I cannot in good conscience assign pilots to this aircraft. I request immediate replacement with F4F Wildcats, or I will ground the entire squadron." The Navy threatened disciplinary action. Carey submitted his resignation rather than fly Buffaloes. His wasn't an isolated case. 3 squadron commanders requested transfers rather than lead Buffalo units. Junior pilots, seeing the Midway losses, asked for reassignment to any aircraft, even obsolete types, rather than fly Buffaloes. Morale in Buffalo squadrons collapsed completely. Pilots told gallows humor jokes. The Buffalo has 2 speeds, slow and falling. It's not a fighter, it's a mobile funeral service. Training accidents spiked. Some were genuine mechanical failures. Others, according to later investigations, may have been deliberate. Pilots were sabotaging their own aircraft rather than take them to combat. The Navy's initial response was denial and blame shifting. An official statement in June 1942 attributed Midway losses to pilot inexperience and tactical errors. The aircraft itself was declared adequate for defensive operations. But internal documents told a different story. A classified memo from the Bureau of Aeronautics, dated June 15, 1942, stated, "The F2A Buffalo has demonstrated fundamental deficiencies rendering it unsuitable for fleet operations. Immediate replacement is recommended." Political pressure complicated everything. Brewster Corporation had powerful allies in Congress. The company employed thousands. Contracts were worth millions. Admitting the Buffalo's failure meant admitting a massive waste of resources. A compromise emerged. Buffaloes would be reassigned to training roles. This was bureaucratic code for too dangerous for combat, not dangerous enough to ground completely. By August 1942, orders went out. No Buffalo would be assigned to frontline combat squadrons. Existing units would transition to Wildcats as soon as production permits. But production couldn't happen overnight. Some squadrons flew Buffaloes until early 1943, 14 months after Midway proved them deadly. The F-4F Wildcat gradually replaced Buffaloes throughout 1942 and 1943. Later, the superior F-6F Hellcat took over. Pilot reaction to the transition was overwhelming relief. One pilot, switching from Buffalo to Wildcat, wrote home, "It's like trading a broken-down mule for a racehorse. Suddenly, I feel like I have a chance." But the transition came at tremendous cost. The Buffalo program consumed $50 million in 1940s dollars, equivalent to over $800 million today. That money bought an aircraft that couldn't fight effectively. Worse was the human cost. At least 157 American pilots died in Buffalo-related accidents and combat losses. Countless others were wounded or psychologically traumatized. The strategic cost was equally severe. For critical months in 1942, American forces in the Pacific had inadequate fighter protection. Bases like Midway depended on Buffaloes that couldn't defend them. This emboldened Japanese aggression and prolonged the war. When historians study America's early Pacific setbacks, the Buffalo's failure ranks among the top contributing factors. The Buffalo's catastrophic failure forced American aviation to fundamentally rethink aircraft development. The first lesson: testing under realistic conditions is non-negotiable. The Buffalo had been tested primarily in ideal weather, at moderate altitudes, with light fuel loads. These conditions bore no resemblance to combat reality. After Midway, the Navy established combat evaluation squadrons. New aircraft would be tested by combat veterans in simulated combat conditions before production approval. Second lesson: weight management cannot be an afterthought. The Buffalo was designed around a specific weight. Modifications added 600 pounds without corresponding structural reinforcement. Post-war designs incorporated weight margins, extra structural capacity to handle future modifications without compromising performance. Third lesson: redundancy saves lives. The Buffalo had single-point failures throughout: one fuel tank, marginal engine cooling, wing structure with minimal safety factors. The F-6F Hellcat, designed with Buffalo's failures in mind, featured redundant systems: multiple fuel tanks with self-sealing protection, robust cooling with backup capacity, wing structures overbuilt to handle combat stress. Fourth lesson: pilot feedback must be integrated immediately. Combat pilots had reported Buffalo problems for months before Midway. Their warnings were dismissed as operator error or lack of training. After the disaster, direct pilot-to-designer communication channels were established. The best pilots rotated home to work directly with engineering teams. Fifth lesson: testing must include extreme scenarios. The Buffalo failed under sustained combat power, high-G maneuvering, and battle damage. These situations weren't tested because they seemed too extreme. Post-war testing protocols included deliberate stress-to-failure tests, combat damage simulation, and extended maximum power runs. Beyond engineering, the Buffalo exposed institutional failures. Political pressure to declare success had silenced warnings. After Midway, regulations protected engineers who raised safety concerns. Whistleblower policies prevented retaliation against those reporting problems. Budget commitments had created unstoppable momentum. The Navy had ordered hundreds of Buffaloes before combat testing. New procurement rules prevented large orders until field validation. The disaster also revealed the danger of foreign combat reports. Finland's success with Buffaloes, against inferior Soviet aircraft in specific conditions, had created false confidence. The Navy learned to weight foreign experience appropriately, considering operational context. Today, The Brewster Buffalo is taught in every military aviation course as case study number 1 in how not to design a fighter. Its lessons influenced every American fighter since. The F-6F Hellcat, P-51 Mustang, and F-4U Corsair all incorporated Buffalo failure lessons. Those aircraft dominated late-war combat. Modern aircraft development, from the F-15 to the F-35, still references Buffalo failures. Environmental testing, pilot integration, realistic evaluation protocols all trace back to lessons written in the blood of Midway pilots. The Buffalo's greatest legacy is the disasters it prevented by exposing fatal flaws in the development process. The Brewster F2A Buffalo remains one of aviation history's most complete failures, designed with ambition, built with hope, marketed with confidence, and defeated utterly the first time it met the enemy it was designed to fight. This wasn't a failure of individual engineers or pilots. It was a systemic failure, political pressure overriding safety concerns, inadequate testing, wishful thinking replacing rigorous evaluation. 157 American pilots paid with their lives for those failures, but their sacrifice wasn't meaningless. The brutal lessons of the Buffalo transformed American aircraft development. The fighters that won the Pacific War, the Hellcat, the Corsair, the Mustang, existed because the Buffalo failed. Sometimes failure teaches more than success ever could. The question we must ask ourselves today: are modern military programs learning these lessons, or are we destined to build another Buffalo, different technology, same fundamental mistakes? What do you think? Are there modern military aircraft that remind you of the Buffalo? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this deep dive valuable, subscribe for more untold stories from World War II. Next week, the aircraft that succeeded despite being called impossible. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss it. Until next time, remember, the most expensive weapon isn't the one you build. It's the one that doesn't work when you need it most.